The 2006 satirical science fiction comedy film Idiocracy brought together a group of actors who each contributed a specific kind of comedic energy to the story. Directed by Mike Judge, the film follows an average man who accidentally wakes up hundreds of years in the future to discover that human intelligence has drastically declined. The effectiveness of the film depends heavily on the performances of its main cast, particularly Luke Wilson, Maya Rudolph, Dax Shepard, and Terry Crews. Each of these performers arrive at the project with different backgrounds in comedy, television, and film, and their careers both were shaped by their involvement in Idiocracy. Luke Wilson plays the film's protagonist, Joe Bowers, an extremely average man who becomes the smartest person alive after being accidentally frozen and awakened 500 years in the future. Wilson had already built a reputation in Hollywood as a laid-back, relatable leading man with a subtle comedic style. His early career was closely tied to the films of director Wes Anderson, particularly the movie Bottle Rocket, which he co-wrote with his brother Anderson collaborator Owen Wilson. Bottle Rocket established Wilson as a performer capable of combining awkward humor with understated charm. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Wilson appeared in a variety of comedies and romantic films, such as Legally Blonde, Old School, and The Royal Tenenbaums. These roles demonstrated his talent for portraying characters who were ordinary yet sympathetic. That quality became central to his role in Idiocracy. Joe Bowers needed to feel believable as someone who was neither brilliant nor foolish, but simply average. Wilson's naturalistic acting style allowed the audience to see the world through Joe's confused perspective. Rather than playing a character as overly heroic or exaggerated, Wilson grounded the story with a quiet sense of disbelief and frustration as he navigated a future society that had become absurdly dysfunctional. Although Idiocracy did not achieve immediate commercial success due to its limited theatrical release, Luke Wilson's performance has been widely praised in retrospect. Many viewers appreciate how he serves as a calm anchor amid the film's exaggerated satire. The role did not drastically change Wilson's career trajectory, but added a cult favorite to his filmography. Over time, Idiocracy became one of the films most associated with his career, particularly among audiences who discovered it through home video and streaming platforms. Maya Rudolph plays Rita, a sex worker who also becomes frozen and wakes up in the same future as Joe. Rita eventually becomes Joe's ally and companion as they attempt to survive in a society dominated by ignorance and consumerism. Before appearing in Idiocracy, Rudolph was primarily known for her work on the sketch comedy show Saturday Night Live. Joining the cast of that program in 2000, she quickly became recognized for her versatility, musical talent, and ability to portray a wide range of characters and celebrity impressions. Her experience on sketch comedy prepared her well for the exaggerated tone of Idiocracy. However, Rudolph's portrayal of Rita also includes moments of sincerity and emotional depth. Although Rita begins the story motivated mostly by self-preservation, she gradually becomes more supportive of Joe's attempts to improve the world around them. Rudolph balances humor with empathy, allowing Rita to develop beyond a simple comedic stereotype. After Idiocracy, Maya Rudolph's career expanded significantly in both television and film. She appeared in numerous successful comedies, including Bridesmaids, Grown Ups, and several animated projects where her distinctive voice became widely recognized. In later years, she would also earn critical acclaim for dramatic performances and voice acting roles. While Idiocracy was not the defining project of her career, it showcased her ability to contribute to satirical storytelling and ensemble comedy. Dax Shepard plays Frito, Joe's future relative and enthusiastic but dim-witted resident of the dystopian future. Frito acts as Joe's guide to the bizarre new world, often providing comic relief through his enthusiastic embrace of the culture's absurdities. Before appearing in Idiocracy, Shepard was known primarily for his work on the reality television series Punk'd, created by Ashton Kutcher. The show involved elaborate celebrity pranks and helped introduce Shepard to mainstream audiences. Transitioning from reality television to scripted acting required Shepard to demonstrate stronger comedic timing and character work. In Idiocracy, he plays Frito as an exaggerated representation of the film's theme, a society that had become increasingly unintelligent. However, Shepard also injects a certain warmth into the character. Frito is not malicious. He is simply a product of his environment. His loyalty to Joe, even when he does not fully understand Joe's ideas, makes him an unexpectedly sympathetic figure. Shepard's performance in Idiocracy helped establish him as a comedic actor capable of supporting roles in ensemble films. In the years following the movie's release, he appeared in several comedies, including Employee of the Month, Let's Go to Prison, and later the action comedy Chips, which he also directed. Beyond acting, Shepard developed a successful career as a podcast host with Armchair Expert, where his candid interviews with celebrities and experts gained widespread popularity. One of the most memorable performances in Idiocracy comes from Terry Crews, who portrays President Camacho. Camacho is a former professional wrestler and action star who has become the President of the United States in the film's future society. Loud, energetic, and physically imposing, Camacho represents the extreme evolution of celebrity politics within the film's satirical world. Before Idiocracy, Terry Crews was known both for his background in professional football and for comedic roles in films such as White Chicks and The Longest Yard. His imposing physical presence combined a surprising sense of comedic timing made him particularly effective in roles that blended intimidation with humor. In Idiocracy, Crews fully embraces the film's exaggerated tone. President Camacho communicates through explosive speeches, dramatic gestures, and overwhelming enthusiasm. The performance became one of the most iconic aspects of the film. Many fans consider Camacho's over-the-top leadership style to be one of the funniest and most memorable portrayals in modern comedy. Although Idiocracy was not a major box office hit at the time, Crews' performance gained increasing attention as the film's cult status grew. After Idiocracy, Terry Crews experienced a major rise in popularity. He became widely recognized for his role as Julius in the television sitcom Everybody Hates Chris, and later as Terry Jeffords in the comedy series Brooklyn Nine-Nine. These roles showcase his ability to combine physical comedy, emotional sincerity, and self-aware humor. Many fans of Idiocracy continue to associate Crews with President Camacho, and some even jokingly suggested him as a real-life political candidate during election seasons. When Idiocracy was released in 2006, it arrived quietly and with very little marketing. The film was directed by Mike Judge, a career already known for sharp social satire through projects like the animated series Beavis, and Behead and King of the Hill, as well as the workplace comedy Office Space. However, unlike those earlier works, Idiocracy initially struggled to find a wide audience. The studio gave the film a very limited theatrical release and provided almost no promotion. As a result, many viewers were not even aware that it existed during its original run. Despite this modest beginning, Idiocracy gradually developed one of the most unusual culture trajectories of any modern comedy film. Over the years following its release, the movie began to gain attention through DVD sales, television broadcasts, and eventually online streaming platforms. As more people discovered it, discussions about the film started to appear across internet forums, blogs, and social media. Viewers began to describe Idiocracy as strangely prophetic, arguing that the exaggerated future depicted in the film felt increasingly similar to real-world trends. The central premise of Idiocracy revolves around a society that becomes progressively less intelligent due to social and cultural changes. In the film, people with higher levels of education tend to delay having children, while less educated individuals reproduce more frequently. Over several centuries, this imbalance leads to a future where critical thinking and intellectual curiosity have almost disappeared. The result is a world dominated by consumerism, shallow entertainment, and anti-intellectual attitudes. Although the film presents this scenario in an intentionally exaggerated and comedic way, many audiences began drawing parallels between the movie and developments in modern society. Discussions about declining trust in science, the spread of misinformation, and the influence of celebrity culture often reference Idiocracy as a satirical framework for understanding these issues. Phrases like, "This feels like Idiocracy," became common expressions online when people encountered situations that seem irrational or absurd. One of the film's most significant cultural impacts came through internet meme culture. Memes are humorous images, phrases, or videos that spread rapidly across digital communities. Idiocracy provided numerous moments that were easily transformed into shareable jokes. Scenes depicting ridiculous advertisements, exaggerated consumer products, and chaotic political speeches became widely circulated online. The character of President Camacho, portrayed by Terry Crews, became especially popular in this context. Camacho's energetic and theatrical leadership style resonated with audiences who were observing increasing overlap between politics, entertainment, and celebrity culture. His speeches in the film are loud, dramatic, and filled with exaggerated enthusiasm rather than detailed policy discussions. Internet users frequently shared clips of these scenes while commenting on real political events, suggesting that the fictional future of Idiocracy was beginning to resemble contemporary political discourse. Another widely referenced element of the film is the fictional sports drink called Brondo, which is marketed in the movie as containing electrolytes. In the story, this drink becomes so popular that it replaces water as a primary liquid used for nearly everything, including irrigation of crops. The absurdity of watering plants with a sugary energy drink leads to agricultural disaster, yet the society refuses to question the product because of aggressive corporate marketing. The phrase, "it's got electrolytes," became a popular internet joke and shorthand for blindly trusting advertising without understanding the underlying science. People began using it sarcastically in discussions about pseudoscience, misleading marketing, or exaggerated health claims. The Brondo storyline also sparked broader conversations about consumer culture and how corporations shape public perception through branding and advertising. Idiocracy also contributed to discussions about the relationship between entertainment and intelligence. The film portrays a future where television programming consists almost entirely of extremely simplistic content, including a fictional show in which someone is repeatedly kicked in the groin for comedic effect. While clearly exaggerated, these scenes prompted viewers to debate whether modern media was becoming more focused on shock value and spectacle rather than thoughtful storytelling. Over time, references to Idiocracy appeared in journalism, academic discussions, and political commentary. Writers and commentators began using the film as a cultural reference point when discussing topics such as declining educational standards, anti-intellectual movements, or the role of social media in spreading misinformation. Although the film was never intended to function as a serious prediction of the future, its satirical exaggerations provided a convenient metaphor for analyzing real social concerns. Another interesting aspect of the film's cultural impact involves the way audiences reassessed it years after its release. When Idiocracy first appeared in theaters, some critics viewed it simply as a crude comedy with exaggerated humor. However, as the social themes of the film became more widely discussed, many people began to see it as a more sophisticated satire. The movie's depiction of corporate influence, environmental neglect, and political spectacle started to feel increasingly relevant. This shift in perception transformed Idiocracy into what many consider a cult classic. A cult classic is a film that may not have been widely successful upon release, but later develops a devoted fan base. These fans often celebrate the movie for its unique tone, memorable characters, or unconventional ideas. Idiocracy fits this definition well, as its popularity grew steadily through word of mouth rather than traditional marketing. The film also became part of broader cultural conversations about dystopian storytelling. Dystopian fiction typically explores societies where social or political systems have become deeply flawed or oppressive. Many well-known dystopian stories focus on authoritarian governments or technological control. Idiocracy stands out because its dystopia emerges from cultural complacency rather than deliberate tyranny. The society depicted in the film collapses intellectually not because of strict control, but because of collective indifference and short-sighted decision-making. This unusual approach to dystopian satire influenced how audiences discussed other works of fiction dealing with similar themes. Commentators sometimes compared Idiocracy to stories about declining civilizations, mass media influence, or the dangers of unchecked consumer culture. Although the film remained primarily comedic in tone, its underlying ideas contributed to conversations about how societies change over long periods of time. In addition to influencing online discussions and political commentary, Idiocracy also left a mark on popular language. Phrases from the film are frequently quoted in everyday conversation among fans. References to Brondo, electrolytes, and President Camacho's enthusiastic speeches appear regularly in internet culture. These references function as a form of shared humor among viewers who recognize the satire behind them. The creation of Idiocracy is almost as unusual and fascinating as the story presented in the film itself. From its early development to its troubled release, the movie experienced a number of challenges that shaped both its production and its legacy. Directed and co-written by Mike Judge, Idiocracy represented an ambitious attempt to expand the social satire that had defined much of Judge's earlier work. While the film eventually became a cult classic, the path to completing and releasing was filled with unexpected obstacles, creative risks, and unusual production decisions. The idea for Idiocracy developed during the early 2000s, a period when Mike Judge was already widely known for creating animated series that combined humor with commentary on modern culture. Through projects like Beavis, Mahead, and King of the Hill, Judge had developed a reputation for observing social trends and exaggerating them in comedic ways. However, he wanted to create a live-action film that pushed this concept even further by imagining how society might evolve if certain cultural patterns continued unchecked. The basic concept of Idiocracy revolves around the idea that intelligence within society gradually declines over time due to social and reproductive trends. Judge and co-writer Ed Cohen developed the story as a broad satire about anti-intellectualism, consumer culture, and the influence of corporate branding. Their goal was not to create a realistic scientific prediction, but rather a comedic exaggeration that could highlight what they saw as troubling cultural tendencies. During the early development stage, Judge faced the challenge of translating a large-scale futuristic setting into a relatively modest film budget. Although the story takes place 500 years in the future, the filmmakers did not have the resources typically associated with big science fiction productions. Instead, they relied on creative production design and location choices to create the appearance of a strange but recognizable future. Casting also played an important role in shaping the tone of the film. Judge intentionally selected actors who could balance absurd humor with grounded performances. Luke Wilson was chosen for the lead role because of his ability to portray an ordinary and relatable character. The entire premise of the story depends on Joe Bowers being an extremely average person, so the performance needed to feel natural rather than exaggerated. Wilson's calm and understated style helped emphasize the contrast between Joe's normal behavior and the chaotic future world around him. Maya Rudolph was cast as Rita partly because of her strong comedic background and her ability to perform both exaggerated humor and emotional sincerity. At the time, she was widely known for her work on Saturday Night Live, where she had demonstrated her versatility in sketch comedy. The filmmakers believed she could bring both comedic timing and character depth to the role. Terry Crews' casting as President Camacho became one of the most inspired choices in the entire production. Crews had previously worked in comedy films where his large physical presence and enthusiastic personality created memorable performances. For Idiocracy, the filmmakers wanted a character who embodied the idea of a celebrity-style political leader. Crews embraced the role with remarkable energy, delivering speeches and physical performances that amplified the film's satirical tone. One of the most interesting behind-the-scenes aspects of Idiocracy involves the creation of its fictional brands and advertisements. The film portrays a future dominated by aggressive corporate marketing, where products are promoted with exaggerated slogans and simplistic messages. The production team designed numerous fictional brands to fill the world of the film, including the energy drink Brondo, which plays a major role in the plot. However, some real companies that had originally allowed their products to appear in the film later became uncomfortable with how those brands were used. Because Idiocracy depicts a society that has become intellectually and culturally degraded, certain companies worry that being associated with that future might damage their public image. According to interviews with people involved in production, some brands requested that their logos or products be removed or altered during editing. This created additional work for filmmakers as they modified scenes to avoid conflicts with corporate partners. Another memorable production story involves the filming of the future society's costumes and hairstyles. The filmmakers intentionally designed clothing that looked ridiculous and impractical, reflecting a culture that valued spectacle over practicality. Costume designers experimented with unusual color combinations, oversized logos, and exaggerated accessories to create a visual style that felt both comedic and slightly disturbing. Many background actors were encouraged to behave in exaggerated ways to emphasize the decline in social norms. During crowd scenes, performers were often asked to react loudly, move chaotically, or display exaggerated emotional responses. This helped create the sense that the future population had become impulsive and easily distracted. Filming locations also contributed to the film's distinctive atmosphere. Much of the movie was shot in and around Austin, Texas, which was already familiar territory for Mike Judge. The production team used a variety of existing buildings and public spaces, modifying them with futuristic signage and props to create the illusion of a distant future. For example, large sports arenas and industrial areas were repurposed to represent the chaotic urban environments of the story setting. One particularly memorable location was a massive stadium used for the scene where Joe Bowers is placed on trial before the public. The filmmakers wanted this sequence to resemble a combination of a sports event and a reality television spectacle. Large crowds, flashing screens, and loud commentary were used to create a chaotic environment where serious decisions were treated like entertainment. Another behind-the-scenes challenge involved creating the fictional television programs shown in the film. These brief clips depict extremely simplistic and absurd entertainment that dominates the future society's media landscape. The production team created several fake shows specifically for these scenes, including one program where a character is repeatedly injured for comedic effect. These segments required additional filming and editing to produce short but memorable moments of satire. Although the filmmakers had completed the movie and expected a normal theatrical release, the distribution process became complicated. The studio responsible for releasing Idiocracy appeared uncertain about how to market the film. Its mixture of political satire, crude humor, and social commentary made it difficult to categorize within traditional marketing strategies. As a result, Idiocracy received an extremely limited theatrical release. It was shown in only a small number of theaters and received almost no advertising support. This unusual distribution decision surprised many people involved in production, including the filmmakers themselves. Without significant promotion, most audiences never had the opportunity to see the movie during its original theatrical run. The narrative structure of Idiocracy follows a classic fish-out-of-water story, but expands that concept into a large-scale satirical exploration of society. The film takes a relatively simple premise and gradually builds it into a bizarre and chaotic vision of the future. By structuring the story around an ordinary man placed in an absurd environment, the film allows the audience to experience the strange world alongside the main character. The pacing moves between moments of confusion, discovery, and escalating stakes as the protagonist realizes the scale of the problem surrounding him. The story begins with a narrated introduction that establishes the film's central premise. The narrator explains that over many generations, a shift in social and reproductive patterns has occurred. Highly educated individuals tend to delay having children while focusing on careers and long-term planning, while less thoughtful individuals reproduce more frequently without considering long-term consequences. Through a comedic montage showing these contrasting lifestyles, the film suggests that this imbalance continues for centuries, gradually lowering the average intelligence of the human population. This opening sequence functions as both exposition and satire. It introduces the idea that society has slowly evolved into a state where critical thinking has largely disappeared. The montage also establishes the tone of the film, mixing exaggerated humor with social commentary. By presenting the premise quickly and humorously, the film prepares the audience for the strange future world that will soon appear. After the introduction, the story shifts to the present day and introduces a protagonist, Joe Bowers. Joe is deliberately portrayed as an extremely average individual. He works an unremarkable job in the military and does not display any exceptional skills or ambitions. This characterization is important because the entire narrative depends on Joe representing the middle point of normal intelligence. He is not particularly brilliant, but he is capable of basic reasoning and common sense. Joe is selected by the military to participate in a classified experiment involving suspended animation. The experiment is meant to test whether a person can be placed in hibernation and awakened in the future. However, the project is poorly organized and soon forgotten due to bureaucratic complications. Joe and another participant, Rita, are placed in hibernation chambers and left in a storage facility. This moment acts as the first major turning point in the narrative. When the experiment is abandoned, the story jumps forward 500 years into the future. During this long period, society continues to decline intellectually while the hibernation chambers remain untouched. When Joe finally awakens, the environment around him has completely transformed. The world he enters is chaotic, noisy, and filled with bizarre advertisements and poorly maintained infrastructure. This marks the beginning of the film's central narrative arc, Joe attempting to understand and survive within a society that has become absurdly dysfunctional. One of the most effective storytelling techniques used in this section is gradual discovery. Rather than immediately explaining everything about the future society, the film reveals information through Joe's interactions with the environment. He notices that people speak with extremely simplified language, struggle to understand basic concepts, and rely heavily on advertising slogans. Joe's first major encounter with this new world occurs when he is arrested for not having an identification tattoo, which has become a standard requirement in the future. He is taken to a hospital where doctors attempt to evaluate his intelligence using a computerized test. Because Joe answers the questions correctly, the system concludes that he must be dangerously abnormal. In a society where intelligence has declined so dramatically, even average reasoning appears suspicious. This sequence highlights one of the film's central narrative devices, reversing normal expectations. Behaviors that would be considered ordinary in the present day are treated as strange or threatening in the future. This reversal creates both comedic moments and narrative tension, as Joe struggles to navigate a system that interprets his intelligence as a problem. The story expands further when Joe meets Frito, a distant descendant who offers to help him understand the world. Frito becomes a guide character, explaining how society operates while also introducing Joe to the bizarre cultural norms of the future. Through Frito's explanations, the audience learns that corporations have gained enormous influence over daily life, and that entertainment has become increasingly simplistic. Another important plot development occurs when Joe discovers that the global food supply is collapsing. Crops are failing across the world because farmers are watering plants with a sports drink called Brondo instead of water. The society believes this is beneficial because advertising campaigns claim that the drink contains electrolytes. However, nobody seems capable of questioning the logic behind this practice. This revelation establishes the central conflict of the story. Joe realizes that he may be the only person capable of understanding the problem and proposing a solution. However, convincing the population to change their behavior proves extremely difficult because they lack the knowledge or patience to consider scientific explanations. The narrative reaches a new level of intensity when Joe is brought before President Camacho. The president is portrayed as an extremely energetic former celebrity who now leads the country. Camacho is frustrated by the ongoing agricultural crisis and is willing to listen to Joe's ideas because Joe appears more intelligent than anyone else available. This moment represents another major turning point. Joe is given the responsibility of solving the food shortage. If he succeeds, he will be rewarded with wealth and freedom. If he fails, he faces severe punishment. This creates a clear narrative objective that drives the remainder of the story. As Joe attempts to solve the crisis, the film continues to explore the absurdity of the future society. He tries to explain basic agricultural concepts, but his explanations are often misunderstood or ignored. Eventually, he manages to convince authorities to use water instead of the sports drink on crops. Although the idea initially seems strange to the population, the experiment begins to produce positive results. The climax of the film occurs when the crops finally start growing again. This moment proves that Joe's solution works and restores food production. The success of this experiment earns him the admiration of the public and the support of President Camacho. The resolution of the story shows Joe adapting to his new role within this future society. Instead of returning to the past, he accepts the responsibility of helping guide humanity toward a more stable future. Rita remains by his side, and the two begin building a new life together. From a narrative perspective, Idiocracy follows a relatively straightforward structure: introduction, displacement, discovery, conflict, and resolution. However, what makes the story unique is the way it uses satire to shape each stage of the narrative. The film's humor arises not only from jokes, but also from the contrast between Joe's ordinary perspective and the extreme environment surrounding him. Idiocracy is often remembered for its outrageous humor and exaggerated depiction of a dysfunctional future. But beneath the comedy lies a complex collection of themes and symbolic ideas. The film uses satire to explore issues related to intelligence, consumer culture, political leadership, media influence, and the long-term consequences of social behavior. While the story is intentionally exaggerated, many of its themes are designed to reflect real concerns about the direction of modern society. By presenting these ideas through humor and absurdity, the film encourages audiences to laugh while also questioning deeper cultural patterns. One of the most prominent themes in Idiocracy is the decline of critical thinking and intellectual curiosity. The film imagines a future where society has gradually lost its ability to analyze problems, question assumptions, or understand basic scientific principles. This theme is introduced in the opening sequence, which suggests that over many generations the balance of intelligence within society has shifted dramatically. Although the explanation is presented humorously, the film uses it as a metaphor for broader concerns about education and intellectual engagement. The future society in Idiocracy rarely values knowledge or learning. Instead, entertainment and immediate gratification dominate everyday life. People rarely ask why things happen or whether certain practices make sense. The film exaggerates this idea by showing citizens who rely entirely on advertising slogans and simple explanations rather than critical reasoning. This theme is closely connected to another major idea in the film, the power of consumer culture. Throughout Idiocracy, corporations have gained enormous influence over society. Advertisements are everywhere, and many aspects of daily life are shaped by marketing campaigns. The fictional energy drink Brondo becomes one of the film's most important symbols of this influence. Brondo is promoted as a superior alternative to water because it contains electrolytes, a word repeated constantly in advertisements. However, nobody seems capable of explaining what electrolytes actually are or why they are beneficial. The entire society accepts the product's superiority simply because marketing messages have convinced them it is true. This leads to one of the film's central problems. Crops are watered with Brondo instead of water, causing agriculture to collapse. Symbolically, Brondo represents the danger of blindly trusting corporate messaging without understanding the science or logic behind it. The fact that an entire civilization chooses a sugary sports drink over water highlights the extreme consequences of allowing marketing to replace knowledge. It also satirizes the way modern advertising often simplifies complex ideas into catchy slogans that discourage deeper thinking. Another important theme in Idiocracy involves the relationship between politics and entertainment. In the film's future, the President of the United States is a former professional wrestler and action star. President Camacho leads the country with loud speeches, dramatic gestures, and enthusiastic displays of personality. While the character is humorous and charismatic, his leadership style reflects a world where political authority has become closely tied to spectacle and performance. This theme explores the idea that political systems can become more focused on entertainment value than thoughtful decision-making. Camacho's speeches resemble the energy of a sports event or concert rather than a traditional political address. The crowds respond with excitement and cheering, treating government announcements as a form of entertainment. However, the film does not portray Camacho as malicious or intentionally destructive. In fact, he genuinely wants to solve the problems facing his country. The satire lies in the fact that his society has reached a point where effective leadership requires someone else to supply the knowledge and reasoning that the system itself lacks. Joe Bowers becomes that source of reasoning, highlighting the contrast between thoughtful problem-solving and performative leadership. The theme of anti-intellectualism also appears repeatedly throughout the film. Anti-intellectualism refers to the rejection or distrust of intellectual pursuits such as education, science, or critical analysis. In Idiocracy, intelligent behavior is often treated as suspicious or abnormal. When Joe correctly answers questions during an intelligence test, the system assumes something must be wrong with him. This reversal emphasizes the absurdity of society that has lost respect for knowledge. Basic problem-solving becomes a rare skill, and individuals who demonstrate logical thinking are viewed as unusual. The film uses this exaggerated situation to comment on real-world attitudes that sometimes dismiss expertise or scientific understanding in favor of simpler explanations. Another theme present in Idiocracy is the idea of cultural complacency. The film suggests that the decline of society did not happen suddenly or through a single dramatic event. Instead, it occurred gradually as people stopped questioning the systems around them. Everyday decisions and small cultural shifts accumulated over centuries, eventually producing a world where many problems went unrecognized for generations. This theme encourages viewers to consider how long-term societal changes can develop slowly and quietly. The citizens of the future world do not perceive their society as broken because it has always functioned that way during their lifetimes. Only someone like Joe, who comes from a different era, can recognize the extent of the dysfunction. The film also explores the theme of adaptation and responsibility through Joe's character arc at the beginning of the story. Joe is not particularly ambitious or driven. He sees himself as an ordinary person with no special role in shaping the future. However, when he discovers that he may be the only individual capable of solving the food crisis, he gradually accepts the responsibility placed upon him. Symbolically, Joe represents the idea that ordinary individuals can become important agents of change when circumstances demand it. He does not possess extraordinary intelligence or advanced knowledge. What sets him apart is simply his ability to apply common sense and basic reasoning. The film suggests that these qualities, often taken for granted, can become incredibly valuable in a society that has lost them. Another subtle theme in Idiocracy involves the relationship between technology and understanding. The future world contains advanced machines, large digital displays, and automated systems. However, the people using these technologies often do not understand how they work. Technology has continued to develop, but the knowledge required to operate and maintain it has largely disappeared. This concept reflects a broader concern about societies becoming dependent on systems that few people fully understand. The film exaggerates a scenario by showing characters who rely on complex machines while lacking even basic scientific awareness. It raises the question of whether technological progress alone can sustain a civilization without the intellectual foundation needed to support it. The visual environment of Idiocracy also contains symbolic elements that reinforce these themes. The cityscapes are filled with oversized advertisements, loud colors, and chaotic signage. The visual style of Idiocracy plays an essential role in communicating the film's satirical message. Although the movie operates primarily as a comedy, its imagery is carefully constructed to reflect the strange and deteriorated society depicted in the story. Director Mike Judge and the cinematography team approached the film with the challenge of portraying a futuristic world that feels both absurd and believable. Because the budget was relatively modest compared to large science fiction productions, the filmmakers relied heavily on creative design choices, lighting techniques, and visual exaggeration rather than expensive special effects. One of the most noticeable aspects of the film's visual style is the deliberate contrast between the present-day setting at the beginning of the movie and the chaotic future environment that appears after Joe awakens. The early scenes take place in relatively normal surroundings. Offices, military facilities, and everyday locations are filmed in a straightforward and somewhat plain manner. The colors are neutral, the lighting is balanced, and the environments appear organized and functional. This calm and familiar visual tone is important because it establishes a baseline for the audience. When the story jumps 500 years into the future, the visual atmosphere changes dramatically. The future world is noisy, cluttered, and filled with overwhelming colors, lights, and advertisements. The difference between these two environments visually communicates the cultural transformation that has taken place over centuries. The cinematography in the future scenes often emphasizes chaos and sensory overload. Wide shots frequently reveal enormous advertisements, crowded public spaces, and brightly colored commercial signs covering nearly every surface. The purpose of this visual design is to create the impression that society has become dominated by consumer culture and constant stimulation. Viewers are meant to feel slightly overwhelmed by the environment, just as the main character does. Lighting also plays a significant role in shaping the film's visual identity. Many scenes in the future are illuminated with harsh, artificial light sources, such as neon signs, digital billboards, and glowing advertisements. This lighting style creates a somewhat artificial atmosphere, where commercial imagery, becomes the most visually dominant element of the landscape. Instead of natural sunlight or subtle lighting, the world appears saturated with bright promotional displays. Another interesting visual technique used in Idiocracy is the exaggerated use of branding and corporate logos. Nearly every location in the future contains references to fictional products and companies. These logos appear on clothing, buildings, vehicles, and even government facilities. The constant presence of branding reinforces the film's theme that corporations have become the most powerful institutions within society. The cinematography often frames these logos in prominent positions within the shot. Sometimes the advertisements occupy more visual space than the characters themselves. This technique subtly communicates the idea that individuals in the society exist within a system controlled by commercial messaging. The environment is designed to constantly remind viewers of the overwhelming influence of consumer culture. Camera movement also contributes to the comedic tone of the film. Many scenes are shot with slightly exaggerated framing that emphasizes awkwardness or confusion. When Joe first wakes up in the future, the camera often lingers on his reactions as he observes the strange world around him. These reaction shots allow the audience to process the absurd environment through his perspective. In some moments, the camera slowly reveals bizarre elements within the frame. For example, background details such as strange hairstyles, unusual clothing, or ridiculous advertisements are often introduced gradually as the camera pans across a scene. This technique allows the humor to build visually before the characters even comment on what is happening. The design of the city itself also plays an important role in the film's visual storytelling. The future metropolis appears poorly maintained, with broken infrastructure, cluttered streets, and chaotic urban planning. Buildings look oversized and clumsy rather than elegant or technologically advanced. This design choice helps emphasize the idea that society has continued to build larger and more complicated systems without maintaining the intellectual ability required to manage them properly. Instead of sleek futuristic architecture commonly seen in science fiction films, the world of Idiocracy feels like an exaggerated extension of modern commercial environments. Shopping malls, stadiums, and entertainment complexes dominate the landscape. Public spaces resemble massive advertising arenas rather than centers of civic life. The film's costume design also interacts closely with the cinematography. Clothing in the future world is intentionally exaggerated, often featuring bright colors, oversized logos, and strange accessories. The cinematography highlights these costumes through medium shots and crowd scenes that emphasize how widespread these fashion choices have become. In large public gatherings, such as a stadium scene where Joe is placed on trial, the camera captures hundreds of background characters dressed in similarly exaggerated outfits. The visual repetition reinforces the idea that cultural trends have become extreme and uniform. Individuality is replaced by mass-produced styles heavily influenced by advertising and entertainment culture. Another key visual moment occurs during the agricultural scenes that reveal the consequences of watering crops with the sports drink Brondo. The farmland initially appears dry and lifeless, with dull colors and sparse vegetation. When water is finally used correctly, the cinematography gradually introduces greener tones and healthier plant life. This shift in color and lighting visually communicates the success of Joe's solution without requiring extensive dialogue. The filmmakers also use certain visual motifs repeatedly throughout the movie. One example is the constant presence of large screens and digital displays showing advertisements or entertainment programs. These screens appear in homes, public spaces, and government buildings, suggesting that media consumption has become the central activity of everyday life. The imagery shown on these screens is often intentionally ridiculous, featuring simple humor, exaggerated product promotions, or crude entertainment. By placing these screens prominently within the frame, the cinematography reminds the audience that media has replaced thoughtful communication as the primary form of cultural expression. Another notable element of the film's visual design is its approach to futuristic technology. Rather than presenting highly advanced or elegant machines, the technology in Idiocracy often looks bulky, poorly designed, or overly complicated. Buttons are oversized, interfaces are confusing, and many systems seem unnecessarily elaborate. The cinematography highlights these design choices by framing machines in ways that emphasize their awkwardness. Characters often struggle to interact with technology that appears impressive but functions poorly due to the lack of understanding among its users. This visual irony reinforces the film's theme that technological progress without intellectual growth can create dysfunctional systems. The audio landscape of Idiocracy plays an important role in shaping the film's tone and reinforcing its satirical vision of the future. Although the movie is often remembered for its visual humor and exaggerated performances, the soundtrack and sound design quietly support many of the film's comedic and thematic elements. Through the use of music, background noise, advertising audio, and environmental sounds, the filmmakers created an auditory world that mirrors a chaotic and overstimulated society portrayed on screen. The film's musical score was composed by Theodore Shapiro, a composer known for his work on numerous comedy films. Shapiro approached the project with the challenge of supporting the film's humor without overwhelming it. Unlike some comedies that rely heavily on loud or overly comedic musical cues, Idiocracy uses its score in a more subtle way. The music often enhances the absurdity of situations by contrasting calm orchestral tones with ridiculous events happening on screen. One of the key roles of the soundtrack is to emphasize Joe Bauer's perspective as he navigates the strange future society. During moments when Joe is confused or overwhelmed, the music often reflects a sense of curiosity or disbelief. Soft orchestral themes appear as he explores unfamiliar environments, reinforcing the idea that he has entered a world that feels both surreal and unsettling. In contrast, scenes involving the chaotic future population frequently feature more energetic or exaggerated musical cues. These moments sometimes include playful rhythms or slightly overdramatic compositions that highlight the absurdity of what the audience is seeing. For example, when large crowds gather for public events or entertainment programs, the music helps transform these scenes into spectacles that resemble sporting events or television shows. One of the most distinctive aspects of the film's audio design is the way advertising and commercial messaging dominate the soundscape. Throughout the movie, characters are constantly surrounded by loud promotional announcements, jingles, and slogans. These audio elements function as an extension of the film's visual emphasis on consumer culture. The fictional product Brondo provides a clear example of this technique. The drink is promoted through repetitive advertising messages that echo throughout the environment. The phrase, "It's got electrolytes," becomes almost hypnotic because it is repeated so frequently by characters and advertisements alike. This repetition is not just a joke. It also demonstrates how marketing language can become embedded in everyday conversation when it is constantly reinforced by media. The sound design intentionally exaggerates the presence of these advertisements. Speakers, television screens, and digital displays blast promotional messages at high volume, creating the impression that the entire society is immersed in a non-stop stream of commercial noise. This auditory overload reflects the film's theme that corporations and marketing have taken over much of public communication. Television programming within the film also contributes significantly to the sound design. Short clips of fictional shows appear throughout the story, and each one includes its own exaggerated audio style. These programs often rely on loud audience reactions, repetitive jokes, and simplistic sound effects. The exaggerated laughter and cheering emphasize how entertainment in the future has become extremely basic and focused on immediate sensory stimulation. The filmmakers use these fictional broadcasts to create a layered audio environment. Even when the main characters are having conversations, background televisions often continue playing these absurd programs. This technique reinforces the idea that media consumption has become a constant part of daily life, filling every available moment with noise. Another important aspect of the film's sound design involves a portrayal of large public spaces. Stadiums, arenas, and crowded city streets appear frequently throughout the story. The audio in these scenes is intentionally chaotic with overlapping voices, cheering crowds, and loud announcements competing for attention. The sound mix is designed to make the viewer feel slightly overwhelmed, mirroring Joe's own reaction to the environment. A particularly memorable example occurs during the scene where Joe is placed on trial in a massive stadium. The event resembles a sporting competition more than a legal proceeding. Commentators speak over loudspeakers while the crowd reacts with excitement and impatience. The exaggerated crowd noise transforms what should be a serious legal situation into a form of entertainment. The use of microphone feedback, echoing speakers, and distorted announcements adds to the chaotic atmosphere. These audio choices emphasize that communication in this future society has become less about clarity and more about spectacle. Sound effects also play a comedic role throughout the film. Exaggerated mechanical noises, clumsy technology sounds, and over-the-top physical effects are used to enhance visual jokes. For instance, machines often produce unnecessarily loud beeping or buzzing noises, suggesting that technology has become more complicated without becoming more efficient. Vehicles, doors, and automated systems frequently emit exaggerated sound effects that draw attention to their awkward design. These sounds highlight the idea that technological progress has continued without corresponding improvements in human understanding or engineering skill. When Idiocracy was first completed in 2005 and prepared for release in 2006, few people involved in production expected that its reception would become one of the most unusual stories in modern film history. Rather than receiving a wide theatrical rollout with strong marketing, the movie was released quietly in a very small number of theaters with almost no promotion. Because of this limited release strategy, the film initially attracted very little attention from both critics and audiences. However, the way people responded to Idiocracy gradually changed over time, transforming the film from an overlooked comedy into a widely discussed cult classic. The initial theatrical release of Idiocracy was extremely small. The studio responsible for distributing the film, 20th Century Fox, released it in only a handful of theaters across the United States. Many of these showings occurred without trailers, posters, or advertising campaigns that would normally accompany a major studio film. In fact, some theaters reportedly received very little promotional material at all. Because the film was shown in so few locations, it had almost no opportunity to build early momentum at the box office. Most audiences were simply unaware that the movie existed. This unusual distribution strategy surprised both the filmmakers and fans of director Mike Judge, who had previously created successful projects such as Office Space and popular animated series. The reasons behind the limited release have been widely discussed over the years. Some industry observers believe the studio was uncertain about how to market the film. Idiocracy combines elements of science fiction, satire, and crude comedy, which made it difficult to fit into traditional promotional categories. Others speculated that the film's critical portrayal of corporate culture and advertising may have made some companies uncomfortable with the movie's message. Regardless of the reason, the result was that Idiocracy did not initially receive the typical wave of critical reviews that accompany most theatrical releases. Because critics often focus on widely distributed films, many major publications did not review the movie at the time of its debut. This meant that the early critical conversation surrounding the film was relatively small. However, as the film became available on DVD and later through television broadcasts, more viewers began to discover it. Home video allowed audiences to watch the movie outside the constraints of its limited theatrical run. Gradually, word of mouth started to spread. Viewers who encountered the film began recommending it to friends, sharing clips online, and discussing its themes on internet forums. As the audience for Idiocracy grew, critics and commentators began revisiting the film with fresh perspectives. Many reviewers who had not seen it during its original release later evaluated it as part of retrospectives on satirical comedy or the work of Mike Judge. This delayed critical attention helped reshape the movie's reputation. One of the most common reactions among critics was recognition of the film's bold satirical concept. While some reviewers noted that the humor could be crude or exaggerated, many also acknowledged that the underlying ideas were unusually ambitious for a mainstream comedy. The film attempts to explore social trends related to consumer culture, media influence, and intellectual decline through an absurd futuristic scenario. Some critics praise the film for its willingness to tackle these themes directly. They argued that the exaggerated future depicted in Idiocracy served as a humorous but thought-provoking commentary on modern society. The film's portrayal of advertising dominance, entertainment-driven politics, and widespread anti-intellectual attitudes resonated with audiences who saw parallels in contemporary culture. However, not all responses were positive. Some critics felt that the film relied too heavily on broad humor and simplistic jokes rather than deeper storytelling. They argued that the premise, while interesting, was not always explored with enough nuance or subtlety. Certain reviewers also expressed concern that the film's concept about declining intelligence could be interpreted in ways that oversimplify complex social issues. Another area of criticism involved the tone of the movie. Idiocracy frequently uses exaggerated stereotypes and crude humor to highlight its satirical points. While many viewers found the style entertaining, others believe that the approach occasionally undermined the film's commentary by focusing too much on shock value. Despite these criticisms, the film's reputation steadily improved as more people discovered it over time. Many viewers appreciated its unusual blend of comedy and speculative social commentary. The movie's relatively short runtime and fast-paced storytelling made it accessible to audiences who enjoyed absurd humor combined with thought-provoking ideas. One of the most interesting aspects of Idiocracy's reception involves how frequently people describe the film as prophetic. As years passed after its release, viewers began pointing out moments in the movie that seemed to resemble real-world developments. Discussions about political spectacle, viral internet culture, and the influence of advertising often referenced scenes from the film. This perception contributed greatly to the film's growing popularity. Audiences shared clips and quotes from Idiocracy online, while commenting on current events that reminded them of the movie's exaggerated future. The phrase, "we are living in idiocracy," became a common joke in internet discussions, especially when people encountered situations that seemed irrational or chaotic. The performance of Terry Crews as President Camacho became one of the most celebrated elements of the film. Critics and fans alike praised his energetic portrayal of the loud and theatrical leader. Crews' ability to balance humor with a sense of enthusiasm made the character memorable, even for viewers who had mixed feelings about other aspects of the film. Luke Wilson's performance also received appreciation for providing a grounded perspective within the absurd world. His calm and understated reactions help anchor the story, allowing audiences to connect emotionally with a character who is just as confused by the future society as they are. Over time, Idiocracy earned a reputation as a cult classic. Cult classics often begin as overlooked or misunderstood films, but eventually develop passionate fan communities. These fans celebrate the movie through online discussions, fan art, quotes, and repeated viewings. The rise of streaming platforms further increased the film's visibility. New audiences encountering Idiocracy years after its release often experienced it without knowing its unusual history. Many were surprised to learn that a film with such a widely discussed premise had originally received so little attention from theaters. Although Idiocracy did not receive major awards or nominations during its release year, its long-term cultural presence has arguably given it a different kind of recognition. The film is frequently included in discussions about influential comedies of the 2000s and about movies that gained popularity long after their original debut. The legacy of Idiocracy is one of the most unusual examples of how a film can grow in cultural importance long after its original release. When the movie first appeared in theaters in 2006, it received very little attention due to its extremely limited distribution and lack of marketing. However, in the years that followed, the film gradually built a reputation as a cult classic. Today, Idiocracy is often discussed not only as a comedy, but also as a piece of social satire that continues to influence conversations about media, politics, and modern culture. One of the key aspects of the film's legacy is how frequently it is referenced in discussions about contemporary society. The exaggerated future world depicted in Idiocracy was originally intended as a comedic scenario, but many viewers later began noticing similarities between the film's fictional society and real-world developments. These comparisons have appeared in online discussions, opinion articles, academic analysis, and everyday conversations. Phrases and ideas from the film have entered popular language. When people encounter situations that seem irrational, chaotic, or dominated by shallow entertainment, they sometimes describe those moments as feeling like idiocracy. This phrase has become a shorthand way of expressing frustration with social trends that appear to prioritize spectacle or simplicity over thoughtful analysis. Another major element of the film's legacy is the continued popularity of its characters and fictional products. The sports drink Brondo, for example, has become one of the most widely recognized fictional brands in comedy cinema. The phrase, "it's got electrolytes," is frequently quoted online as a joke about marketing language and exaggerated health claims. This simple line from the movie has become a humorous symbol of how advertising can influence public perception. The character of President Camacho, played by Terry Crews, has also become an iconic figure within the film's fan community. Camacho's energetic speeches and theatrical leadership style captured the imagination of audiences who appreciated the film's exaggerated portrayal of celebrity-driven politics. Clips of his scenes are often shared online, especially during real-world political events. In fact, during certain election seasons, some fans jokingly suggested Terry Crews as a fictional presidential candidate because of his performance in the movie. Although these suggestions were humorous rather than serious, they demonstrated how strongly the character had embedded itself in internet culture. Camacho's personality represents one of the film's most memorable examples of satire, blending entertainment spectacle with political authority. The film's influence also appears in the way people discuss media and entertainment trends. Idiocracy presents a future where television programming has become extremely simplistic, focusing on basic humor and immediate sensory stimulation. While this portrayal is clearly exaggerated, viewers often compare it to real debates about the evolution of entertainment media. Discussions about reality television, viral internet videos, and short-form social media content sometimes reference the film's depiction of mindless entertainment. Critics and commentators occasionally use Idiocracy as a cultural reference point when examining how media consumption habits are changing in the digital age. Another important aspect of the film's legacy involved the work of director Mike Judge. Idiocracy is now often viewed as part of a larger pattern within Judge's career. Many of his projects explore themes related to bureaucracy, corporate culture, and the absurdities of everyday life. Earlier films such as Office Space focus on workplace environments, while his animated series frequently examine social behavior and cultural trends. Idiocracy extended these observations into a speculative future, imagining how certain tendencies might evolve over centuries. As audiences revisited Judge's body of work, they began recognizing consistent themes across his projects. This retrospective appreciation helped strengthen Idiocracy's reputation as an important piece of his creative legacy. The film's growing popularity also influenced discussions about dystopian storytelling and comedy. Most dystopian films focus on dark, oppressive worlds dominated by authoritarian governments or technological control. Idiocracy took a different approach by presenting a dystopia that emerged through cultural neglect rather than direct oppression. This concept opened the door for other storytellers to explore similar ideas. The notion that a society could decline through collective indifference, consumer obsession, or intellectual complacency became an interesting theme for writers and filmmakers. While Idiocracy was not the first work to explore such ideas, its comedic presentation made the concept accessible to a broad audience. In addition to influencing cultural conversations, the film also demonstrated how cult classics can develop through unconventional paths. Many cult films achieve popularity through midnight screenings, fan conventions, or niche communities. Idiocracy's growth was largely driven by internet culture. Online forums, video sharing platforms, and social media allowed viewers to share clips, quotes, and discussions about the movie. This digital word of mouth played a crucial role in expanding the film's audience. People who had never heard of Idiocracy during its theatrical release discovered it through recommendations and online discussions. As more viewers watched the film, the conversation around its themes continued to grow. Another interesting aspect of the film's legacy is the ongoing debate about whether its satire should be interpreted as humorous exaggeration or as a serious warning. Some viewers see the movie primarily as a silly comedy that exaggerates human behavior for entertainment. Others interpret it as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of ignoring education, scientific understanding, and critical thinking. This debate keeps the film relevant because it encourages audiences to reflect on their own perspectives about modern culture. The exaggerated future world acts as a mirror that invites viewers to consider how social trends might evolve over long periods of time. Idiocracy has also gained recognition within academic discussions about media satire. Scholars studying the relationship between comedy and social commentary sometimes analyze the film as an example of how humor can address complex cultural issues. The movie demonstrates how exaggeration and absurdity can highlight patterns that might otherwise be difficult to discuss directly. Even the story of the film's troubled release has become part of its legacy. Many fans find it ironic that a movie criticizing corporate influence and cultural complacency struggled to receive proper promotion from its own studio. This unusual history adds another layer of intrigue to the film's reputation. Over time, Idiocracy has been included in lists of underrated or overlooked films that later gained recognition. Critics who revisit the movie often note how its cultural relevance has grown as audiences continue drawing comparisons between its fictional world and real events. Although the film never produced direct sequels, spin-offs, or official merchandise on a large scale, its influence exists primarily through cultural references and shared humor. The ideas and images introduced in Idiocracy continue to circulate through internet memes, commentary, and fan discussions. One of the most fascinating aspects of Idiocracy is how audiences have interpreted the film over time. When the movie was first released in 2006, very few people had the opportunity to see it due to its extremely limited theatrical run. Because of this, the early audience reaction was small and relatively quiet. However, as the film gradually spread through DVD sales, television broadcasts, and streaming services, viewers began forming strong opinions about its themes and humor. The audience response has evolved over the years, transforming the movie from an overlooked comedy into a widely discussed cultural reference point. Many viewers initially approached Idiocracy as a simple satirical comedy. The exaggerated world of the film, filled with ridiculous advertisements, chaotic politics, and absurd entertainment, created plenty of opportunities for laughter. Audiences often enjoyed the film for its outrageous jokes, memorable characters, and bizarre futuristic setting. The performance of Terry Crews as President Camacho, for example, became one of the most talked-about elements of the movie. Viewers frequently mention his energetic speeches and over-the-top personality as highlights of the experience. However, as more people watched the film and discussed it with others, deeper interpretations began to emerge. Many audiences realized that the movie was not only trying to entertain, but also attempting to comment on cultural patterns within modern society. The exaggerated future portrayed in Idiocracy encouraged viewers to think about how certain trends might develop if they continued unchecked. For some audiences, the film felt surprisingly relevant even years after its release. Viewers often pointed to the movie's portrayal of aggressive advertising, simplistic entertainment, and celebrity-driven politics as elements that seemed to reflect real-world developments. As social media and digital platforms became more influential in everyday life, people began drawing comparisons between the film's fictional media environment and the constant flow of content available online. One common audience reaction involves the mixture of humor and discomfort that the film can create. Many viewers laugh at the absurdity of the future society, while simultaneously feeling uneasy about the possibility that some aspects of satire might contain a grain of truth. This combination of amusement and reflection has contributed to the film's lasting popularity. Internet culture played a major role in shaping audience interpretation. As clips from the movie were shared online, viewers began turning specific moments into memes and jokes. The fictional sports drink Brondo and the phrase, "It's got electrolytes," became particularly popular. Audiences often use this phrase humorously when discussing exaggerated marketing claims or questionable scientific explanations. Memes allowed people to communicate their interpretation of the film quickly and humorously. Instead of writing long analyses, users could simply share a screenshot or quote from Idiocracy to comment on current events or cultural trends. This process helped the movie remain visible in public conversation long after its original release. Another interesting element of audience reflection involves generational differences in interpretation. Viewers who watched the film shortly after its release often saw it mainly as a parody of contemporary culture. At that time, the exaggerated future society felt distant and clearly fictional. However, younger audiences discovering the movie years later sometimes interpret it differently. For some younger viewers, the world depicted in Idiocracy feels less like a distant fantasy and more like an extreme version of trends they already recognize. The constant presence of advertisements, the influence of viral media, and the blending of entertainment with public life are all elements that modern audiences encounter regularly. Because of this, newer viewers sometimes describe the film as feeling strangely familiar. This shift in perspective has contributed to the film's reputation as being ahead of its time. Although the movie was created as satire, audiences continue to debate whether certain aspects of its fictional society resemble real developments. These discussions appear frequently in online forums, social media conversations, and cultural commentary. Audience interpretation has also expanded into more serious discussions about education and critical thinking. Some viewers see the film as a humorous warning about the importance of maintaining strong educational systems and encouraging intellectual curiosity. The exaggerated decline in intelligence shown in the story becomes a symbolic representation of what might happen if society stopped valuing knowledge and learning. Others interpret the film as a critique of consumer culture. The dominance of corporations and advertising in the movie's future world reflects concerns about how commercial interests influence modern life. Audiences who focus on this theme often discuss how marketing strategies shape public perception and decision-making. At the same time, some viewers have raised concerns about the film's central premise. The opening explanation about declining intelligence due to reproductive patterns has sparked debate among audiences who feel that the concept oversimplifies complex social issues. Critics of the film argue that intelligence and social behavior are influenced by many factors, and they worry that the movie's premise might encourage misleading interpretations if taken too literally. These debates demonstrate that audience engagement with Idiocracy goes beyond simple entertainment. Viewers actively analyze and question the ideas presented in the story, sometimes agreeing with its satire and sometimes challenging its assumptions. This ongoing discussion keeps the film relevant even decades after its release. Another important part of audience reflection involves the emotional connection viewers feel with the main character, Joe Bowers. Many people relate to Joe's sense of confusion and frustration as he navigates a world that seems irrational. His reactions mirror the audience's own disbelief as they witness the absurd society around him. Because Joe is not portrayed as a genius or superhero, audiences often see him as a stand-in for ordinary individuals trying to make sense of complex systems. His reliance on basic common sense becomes a powerful contrast to the chaos surrounding him. Viewers sometimes interpret his character as a reminder that simple reasoning and curiosity can be valuable tools for addressing complicated problems. The relationship between Joe and Rita also resonates with audiences who appreciate the film's lighter emotional moments. Their partnership evolves from mutual survival into a genuine connection. While the movie focuses primarily on satire and humor, this relationship provides a small but meaningful sense of hope within the strange future world. Over time, audience reflection has transformed Idiocracy into more than just a comedy film. The characters in Idiocracy are central to both the comedic impact and the satirical message of the film. While the world around them is exaggerated and absurd, the main characters provide the emotional and narrative anchor that allows audiences to engage with the story. Character development in Idiocracy is subtle yet significant. The film uses transformation, contrast, and interaction to explore themes such as intelligence, responsibility, and social adaptation. Each major character has a distinct arc that contributes to the overall narrative, while also reflecting the broader satire of society in decline. Joe Bowers, the protagonist, is the most central character through which the audience experiences the story. At the beginning of the film, Joe is deliberately presented as average in every sense. He has a mundane job in the military, displays minimal ambition, and goes through life without questioning the systems around him. His ordinariness is crucial because it sets up the film's central comedic and thematic contrasts. Joe is perfectly normal in the present day, but appears extraordinary in a future society dominated by anti-intellectualism. His character arc revolves around adaptation and the recognition of responsibility. When Joe awakens 500 years in the future, his initial reaction is confusion and disbelief. The film carefully portrays his struggle to comprehend a world where basic reasoning and critical thinking are considered abnormal. This situational disorientation drives much of the early comedic tension. However, beyond the humor, Joe gradually begins to understand the societal dysfunction around him. He observes the failures in agriculture, the over-reliance on advertising, and the chaotic governance of President Camacho. His arc develops from passive observer to active problem solver as he recognizes that his ordinary reasoning skills are now extraordinarily valuable. By the climax, Joe has fully embraced the responsibility thrust upon him, demonstrating growth in confidence, initiative, and leadership. Rita, the female lead, serves as both companion and a narrative guide for Jo. Initially, she is pragmatic, resourceful, and skeptical of the world around her. Unlike Jo, who represents average intelligence, Rita has adapted to survive in the chaotic future. Her character arc is less about transformation and more about revealing depth and competence in a society that undervalues intellect. Rita's interactions with Jo highlight contrasts in adaptation strategies. She navigates the absurdity through practical understanding, while he relies on rediscovered common sense. Over the course of the story, their relationship develops from cooperation to mutual trust and partnership, adding emotional resonance to the narrative. Rita's arc emphasizes the importance of adaptability and critical thinking, showing audiences that intelligence can manifest in multiple forms. President Camacho represents one of the film's most memorable supporting character arcs. Played with explosive energy and charisma, Camacho is initially portrayed as a larger-than-life celebrity leader whose focus is on spectacle and entertainment rather than serious governance. At first glance, he appears shallow and driven solely by audience approval. However, as the story progresses, his art demonstrates a degree of pragmatism and willingness to listen to solutions that come from unusual sources. Camacho's ability to recognize Jo's unique value and delegate authority illustrates that even in a dysfunctional system, effective leadership can emerge when individuals combine charisma with strategic insight. The arc of Camacho reinforces the film's satire by highlighting the absurdity of relying on entertainment-oriented figures to solve real-world problems, while also showing that adaptability and openness can be valuable traits in leadership. Frito, Jo's guide and distant descendant, has a smaller but significant arc. He begins as a carefree and humorous character who enjoys the chaotic future as it is. Frito serves as a bridge between Jo and the world around him, providing exposition and helping the audience understand the logic, or lack thereof, of the society. Over time, Frito becomes more serious as the stakes escalate, particularly during the agricultural crisis. His art demonstrates a subtle evolution from passive observer to engaged participant, illustrating that even characters who initially embrace absurdity can recognize a need for action when circumstances demand it. Minor characters, such as background citizens, hospital staff, and media personalities, function primarily as reflections of the society's intellectual decline. Their exaggerated behaviors, simplified dialogue, and obsession with entertainment reinforce the satire and emphasize the contrast with Jo and Rita's rational thinking. Though they do not undergo significant individual arcs, their consistent traits provide the framework against which the main character's growth is highlighted. The interplay between character arcs also serves to advance the narrative structure. Jo's development from passive average man to problem solver is mirrored and amplified by his relationships with Rita, President Camacho, and Frito. These interactions provide opportunities for humor, social commentary, and plot progression. For example, Jo's attempts to explain water versus Brondo to the population highlight both his logical reasoning and the audience's recognition of absurd societal norms. Rita supports him practically. Frito translates the situation into relatable terms, and Camacho ultimately legitimizes Jo's authority. This network of relationships ensures that character growth is intertwined with the unfolding story. Another notable aspect of character development is how Idiocracy uses contrast and exaggeration to enhance both comedy and satire. Jo and Rita are deliberately grounded in reality and common sense, which makes the absurdity of the future world more apparent. Other characters, by contrast, are extreme caricatures. President Camacho embodies hyper-energetic spectacle, media personalities emphasize shallow entertainment, and background citizens reflect exaggerated laziness and distraction. The juxtaposition between these extremes in Jo's ordinariness heightens both the humor and the audience's understanding of the thematic critique. The arcs also underscore the film's exploration of social responsibility and the potential impact of ordinary individuals. Jo's growth illustrates that even average people can make meaningful contributions when confronted with systemic failure. Rita's consistent competence highlights the value of practical intelligence and adaptability. Camacho's leadership arc, although brief, shows the interplay between charisma and problem-solving. Together, these arcs present a nuanced commentary. The ability to think critically, act responsibly, and collaborate with others is what ultimately allows society to correct itself, even in an exaggeratedly dysfunctional world. The costume and set design in Idiocracy are essential elements in creating the film's exaggerated, dystopian future. These visual components serve both comedic and narrative purposes, reinforcing the satire by showing how culture, consumerism, and societal decline manifest in physical spaces and personal appearance. Unlike many futuristic films that rely on sleek, high-tech aesthetics, Idiocracy presents a world that feels messy, overbuilt, and visually chaotic, reflecting the intellectual and cultural deterioration at the center of the story. The costumes and sets work together to immerse audiences in a world that is simultaneously recognizable and absurd. Starting with costume design, the filmmakers use clothing and personal style to communicate both societal trends and character traits. In the future society, citizens wear brightly colored, often mismatched outfits dominated by corporate logos. T-shirts, hats, and pants prominently display branding for fictional products like Brondo and other exaggerated commercial icons. The repetition of logos on clothing functions as a visual motif, emphasizing the film's commentary on consumerism and advertising's influence over everyday life. Audiences immediately notice that individuals are defined more by what they consume than by personal identity or skill. The characters' hairstyles and accessories further reinforce societal absurdity. Many citizens sport extreme haircuts, oversized glasses, or neon-colored wigs, exaggerating contemporary fashion trends into ridiculous extremes. These visual exaggerations serve a dual purpose. They create comedic effect while symbolizing a lack of sophistication and critical thought in the culture. Minor characters, in particular, are designed to appear uniform in their exaggerated trends, visually reinforcing the idea that individuality has been replaced by homogenized consumer-driven culture. Main characters have slightly more restrained costumes to differentiate them from a chaotic population. Joe Bauer's clothing is relatively plain, practical, and muted compared to the loud outfits of the citizens around him. This visual contrast underscores his role as an everyman and highlights how his ordinariness appears extraordinary in the context of society that values absurdity over reason. Rita's costumes are slightly functional and utilitarian, reflecting her practical intelligence and adaptability. She often wears clothing suitable for survival in a chaotic environment, which visually communicates her competence and resourcefulness. President Camacho's costumes are a stark contrast, often flashy, loud, and designed to draw attention. Oversized jackets, bright colors, and exaggerated accessories emphasize his performative personality, aligning with his role as both political leader and entertainment spectacle. The makeup and prosthetic design also play a subtle but important role. The film exaggerates certain facial features, hairstyles, and expressions among background characters to enhance comedic effect. Wrinkles, exaggerated smiles, or overly stylized haircuts create an impression of society that has abandoned natural norms for spectacle and branding. Makeup is intentionally overdone at times to reinforce the absurdity without being grotesque, maintaining a balance between humor and believability. Moving to set design, the physical environment of Idiocracy reflect the collapse of thoughtful infrastructure alongside the rise of consumerism. The future society's urban and rural landscapes are cluttered, poorly maintained, and dominated by massive advertisements. Buildings appear oversized, uneven, and often nonsensical in function, reflecting a lack of planning or understanding in societal development. Neon lights, large digital billboards, and banners fill cityscapes, ensuring that the dominance of marketing is visually pervasive. Audiences quickly perceive the chaotic, overstimulated nature of the society simply by looking at the sets. Interior sets, such as homes, offices, and government buildings, continue this pattern. Everyday spaces are filled with branded products, oversized furniture, and exaggerated color schemes. The excessive visual clutter is intended to communicate both the sensory overload of the environment and a decline in aesthetic judgment. Hallways, public service areas, and hospitals are poorly organized, reflecting a society that has abandoned thoughtful design principles in favor of immediate convenience or spectacle. The set design also extends to rural and agricultural locations. The farmland scenes are particularly important to plot, showing the consequences of watering crops with Brondo instead of water. These sets combine dead or dry vegetation with industrial or commercial signage, visually illustrating how corporate influence has reached even essential systems like agriculture. When Joe's plan to use water succeeds, the set gradually incorporates greener tones and healthier plants, signaling restoration and the positive impact of reasoning. This subtle visual storytelling reinforces a narrative arc without relying on dialogue. Technology in the sets is deliberately designed to appear bulky, poorly understood, and overcomplicated. Computers, medical equipment, and machines are oversized and awkwardly placed, emphasizing that society has advanced technologically without retaining the knowledge needed to operate systems intelligently. Props such as control panels, buttons, and devices often have redundant or meaningless features, visually reinforcing the theme that progress without understanding leads to dysfunction. The filmmakers made extensive use of crowd scenes to enhance the impression of a chaotic, overstimulated society. Stadiums, arenas, and public gatherings are filled with extras wearing brightly colored, logo-covered costumes. The set dressing includes banners, advertisements, and props that overwhelm the viewer's visual field, emphasizing sensory overload and reflecting the film's social commentary about mass consumer behavior. These crowded environments also create opportunities for visual humor, as subtle jokes and absurd details populate the background. Practical effects and physical set elements were emphasized over digital effects to maintain a grounded, tangible quality. The environments, props, and costumes all feel like extensions of contemporary society taken to extremes, which strengthens the satire. Audiences recognize elements of the world around them, but every detail is exaggerated to highlight absurdity, making the future world both familiar and ridiculous. The overall coordination of costume and set design creates a cohesive aesthetic for Idiocracy. The bright colors, excessive branding, and chaotic organization of spaces mirror the intellectual and cultural decline explored in the narrative. The visual storytelling communicates themes of consumerism, spectacle, and anti-intellectualism without requiring explicit exposition, allowing the audience to absorb the satire through both humor and observation. The dialogue and script writing in Idiocracy are central to the film's satire and humor. Mike Judge, who co-wrote the screenplay with Ed Cohen, crafted a script that combines absurdity, social commentary, and sharp comedic timing. The writing is designed to highlight the extreme intellectual decline of society, while providing memorable lines that continue to resonate with audiences. The dialogue works both to develop character, advance the plot, and communicate broader thematic concerns, all while maintaining a consistent comedic tone. One of the most notable features of the script is its use of simplified and exaggerated language to convey the decline in intelligence. Characters frequently speak in short, fragmented sentences, use repetitive phrases, or misunderstand basic concepts. This stylistic choice communicates the state of society immediately to the audience. For example, citizens frequently repeat corporate slogans and use words like electrolytes without understanding their meaning. This use of dialogue as satire emphasizes the film's themes of anti-intellectualism and the overwhelming influence of consumer culture. The script also relies heavily on juxtaposition to create humor. Joe Bowers, the protagonist, speaks in clear, logical sentences that reflect common sense and ordinary intelligence. When he interacts with citizens of the future, the contrast between his coherent speech and their fragmented, slogan-heavy dialogue produces both comedy and thematic reinforcement. Joe's calm, rational explanations often serve as punchlines in themselves, highlighting how rare critical thinking has become in the film society. Another key aspect of the dialogue is its economy. The screenplay frequently uses short, concise lines to deliver humor efficiently. Characters often state obvious or absurd ideas bluntly, creating a comedic rhythm that builds quickly. For example, when Joe tries to explain why water is needed for crops instead of Brondo, the citizens' responses are limited to repetitive or nonsensical phrases, emphasizing their lack of understanding. The humor arises not from clever wordplay, but from the absurdity and simplicity of communication in this fictional society. The script also makes deliberate use of repetition for comedic effect. Certain phrases, slogans, and ideas appear multiple times throughout the film to reinforce the sense of society dominated by marketing and media. The repeated use of "it's got electrolytes" is one of the clearest examples, but similar repetitions appear in television programs, public announcements, and casual conversations. This repetition serves both as humor and as thematic reinforcement, showing the pervasive influence of advertising and shallow thinking. Humor in Idiocracy is often a blend of verbal comedy and visual context. The screenplay allows characters to deliver lines that are funny on their own while also setting up or responding to absurd visual elements. For instance, Joe and Rita might comment on a ridiculous product or strange public display, with a line highlighting the contrast between rational thought and societal absurdity. This integration of dialogue and visual cues is a hallmark of Mike Judge's writing style and contributes to the film's cohesive satirical tone. Memorable lines in Idiocracy often become part of its cultural legacy. Beyond, it's got electrolytes. Other lines, such as Joe's straightforward explanations or Camacho's over-the-top speeches, have endured in audience memory. President Camacho's dialogue, in particular, demonstrates a distinct style, bombastic, energetic, and performative. His lines often mimic the cadence of entertainment announcements or sporting events, which underscores the film's critique of politics as spectacle. The writing captures both the absurdity and the charisma of his character, allowing audiences to remember these moments long after viewing. The script also includes subtle, character-driven humor. Joe's lines are often understated, reflecting his confusion or disbelief at the world around him. These moments create a relatable perspective for the audience, as his reactions mirror their own. Rita's dialogue emphasizes practicality and common sense, often serving as a foil to the over-the-top statements of background citizens or media personalities. The careful balance of different dialogue styles allows the film to maintain humor while providing narrative clarity. Exposition in Idiocracy is often delivered through dialogue rather than traditional narration. Characters explain the state of society, the malfunctioning agriculture system, or government decisions in conversation, allowing the audience to understand the stakes without breaking the comedic rhythm. The writing manages to convey information efficiently while keeping it entertaining, a testament to the careful crafting of the script. The pacing of conversations is another strength of the screenplay. Exchanges are often rapid and punchy, which keeps scenes moving quickly. When Joe attempts to reason with citizens or present solutions, the dialogue often accelerates into repeated interruptions or misunderstandings. This rhythm not only heightens a comedy, but also visually and audibly communicates the inefficiency and dysfunction of society. The screenplay also uses humor to comment on cultural trends. Background characters, commercials, and news broadcasts deliver lines that exaggerate contemporary behaviors into ridiculous extremes. Phrases used by citizens often mirror shallow media messaging, reality television tropes, or consumer slogans, creating a satirical reflection of real-world culture. This self-aware writing allows Idiocracy to function as both a comedy and a critique of societal patterns. Another notable element is the integration of wordplay and misunderstanding. Many jokes arise from characters misusing language or interpreting words literally. These instances reinforce the theme of intellectual decline while providing clever, situational humor. By focusing on how people communicate, the script highlights the absurdity of society that has lost comprehension of basic concepts. The marketing and promotion of Idiocracy is notable largely because it was unusually minimal and unconventional for a film produced by a major studio. Unlike most Hollywood releases, Idiocracy did not benefit from a broad advertising campaign or extensive promotional materials during its initial release in 2006. This limited marketing strategy played a key role in the film's early obscurity, but it has since become a point of discussion in understanding the movie's eventual cult status and how audiences discovered it through word-of-mouth, home video, and internet culture. Theatrical promotion for Idiocracy was nearly non-existent. The studio responsible for distribution, 20th Century Fox, released the film in only a handful of theaters, often without trailers running in advance or significant press coverage. Posters and billboards were sparse, and some theaters reportedly received only basic or generic promotional materials. The lack of marketing meant that the film failed to attract the attention of mainstream audiences or major critics at the time of its debut. As a result, its initial box office performance was negligible. The limited promotion created an unusual dynamic where the film's quality and creative vision were largely invisible to the general public. Audiences who did encounter the film in theaters were often surprised, as they had little prior awareness of its release. Many viewers first discovered Idiocracy through word of mouth or by stumbling across it on home video, rather than through a traditional marketing funnel. Home video and DVD distribution became the primary avenue for promotion after the film's theatrical release. Once the movie became available for rental and purchase, it slowly gained attention. Fans shared copies with friends and recommended it in online forums, creating grassroots promotion that was far more effective than the initial studio efforts. DVD releases included minimal extras or commentary, focusing primarily on the film itself, allowing audiences to engage directly with the story without heavy studio framing. Internet culture played a crucial role in the film's promotion after its initial release. Early social media platforms, online discussion forums, and video sharing sites allowed fans to share memorable clips, quotes, and scenes. These viral moments, often humorous or absurd in nature, became informal marketing tools. Phrases like, "It's got electrolytes," and iconic scenes featuring President Camacho were widely circulated online, encouraging viewers who had not seen the film in theaters to seek it out. This grassroots promotion helped establish the movie's reputation as a cult comedy. The film's marketing, or lack thereof, also contributed to its narrative as an underrated or overlooked gem. Audiences often discuss Idiocracy with a sense of discovery, emphasizing that it was a major studio film that somehow slipped under the radar. This perception has become part of its identity, with a minimal promotion creating a mystique that enhanced its eventual cult following. The promotion materials that did exist, such as posters and cover art for home video, leaned into the film's satirical elements. DVD covers featured bright, chaotic colors, exaggerated fonts, and images of Joe Bowers and President Camacho in ways that visually communicated the absurdity of the future society. The packaging emphasized humor and spectacle, signaling to potential viewers that the film combined comedy with social commentary. Trailers for the film were also limited. Those that were created highlighted absurd scenarios, memorable quotes, and comedic situations rather than focusing on traditional story beats or dramatic tension. These trailers effectively communicated the tone of the film, but reached only a fraction of the potential audience due to lack of widespread theatrical marketing. Another unconventional aspect of Idiocracy's promotional life is its long-term online engagement. Years after the film's release, memes, GIFs, and references to scenes became widespread on social media platforms. This digital promotion effectively replaced the traditional marketing campaign, with fans sharing humorous elements that encouraged new viewers to watch the film. In this sense, Idiocracy became a prime example of how viral online content can serve as a form of post-release marketing. Fan engagement also contributed to the film's promotion. Discussion threads, reviews, and video commentary created a community around the movie. Viewers recommended the film as a hidden gem, generating curiosity and prompting others to discover for themselves. This kind of promotion, driven entirely by audience enthusiasm rather than studio strategy, played a key role in solidifying Idiocracy's reputation as a cult classic. Merchandising was minimal at best. Unlike major blockbuster films, Idiocracy did not have widespread commercial products, toys, or tie-ins. The fictional products within the movie, such as Brondo, became recognizable cultural icons largely through audience engagement and online sharing rather than actual merchandise. In a sense, the film's satire on consumer culture extended into its real-world marketing, as it generated popularity without needing corporate branding or extensive commercial promotion. The combination of limited initial release, minimal theatrical promotion, and strong post-release audience engagement demonstrates how Idiocracy's marketing story is as unique as the film itself. Rather than relying on traditional advertising, the movie gained momentum through discovery, discussion, and viral sharing. This unconventional trajectory contributed to its identity as a cult classic, creating a sense of intimacy and ownership among early viewers who felt they had discovered something overlooked by mainstream culture. Idiocracy can be better understood by comparing it to similar films, both in terms of genre and the director's body of work. When examined alongside other dystopian comedies, satirical science fiction, and Mike Judge's previous projects, Idiocracy stands out for its unique blend of humor, social commentary, and speculative world building. While some films explore future societies in a serious or grim manner, Idiocracy uses absurdity and exaggeration to deliver satire, making it distinct in tone, style, and approach. One useful comparison is with classic dystopian films, such as A Clockwork Orange, Brazil, or Logan's Run. These movies often depict future societies dominated by authoritarian control, oppressive technology, or strict social hierarchies. The tone in these films is generally dark, dramatic, or suspenseful, emphasizing the dangers of societal or technological excess. Idiocracy, by contrast, presents a dystopia created not by direct oppression, but by intellectual neglect and cultural decline. Its society is chaotic and poorly managed, but the threat is absurd rather than menacing. This contrast highlights Idiocracy's unique approach to dystopian storytelling, focusing on humor and exaggeration instead of suspense or fear. Science fiction comedies provide another point of comparison. Films such as Back to the Future Part 2 and Demolition Man also explore future societies with satirical or humorous elements. Back to the Future Part 2 presents a technologically advanced but culturally exaggerated 2015, exploring trends in consumerism, while Demolition Man satirizes excessive political correctness and sterile urban planning. Idiocracy shares a similar approach to social exaggeration, but it distinguishes itself by taking the concept to extremes in a more dystopian and chaotic direction. The society in Idiocracy is not simply humorous. It is deliberately illogical, exaggerated, and dysfunctional, creating a unique comedic landscape. Comparing Idiocracy to Mike Judge's earlier work also reveals thematic and stylistic continuity. Office Space, for instance, satirizes corporate bureaucracy and the absurdity of mundane work life. Similarly, the animated series Beavis and Butt-Head highlights societal apathy, anti-intellectual behavior, and the influence of media on youth. Idiocracy extends these observations into a speculative future, imagining what might happen if anti-intellectual tendencies and consumer culture are amplified over centuries. The film shares Judge's signature style of blending sharp social commentary with humor, while placing ordinary characters in situations that expose societal absurdity. The film can also be compared to other social satires that exaggerate human behavior for comedic effect. Movies such as Anchorman or Team America. World Police use caricature characters and absurd dialogue to comment on contemporary cultural trends. Idiocracy shares this approach, exaggerating traits like laziness, commercial obsession, and superficial thinking, but its focus on a future society gives it a speculative dimension that separates it from purely contemporary satires. Its humor arises not only from individual characters, but also from the societal systems they inhabit, creating a more immersive and layered comedic experience. A key distinction of Idiocracy is its use of the protagonist as a lens through which audiences perceive societal absurdity. Joe Bowers is ordinary in the present day, but becomes extraordinary in the future society, which allows for a unique form of contrast and commentary. While other films often rely on highly skilled or heroic protagonists, Idiocracy emphasizes the idea that simple common sense is a rare and powerful trait in a dysfunctional world. This narrative choice reinforces the film's themes and amplifies its satirical impact, distinguishing it from other comedies or speculative fiction films. Tone and visual style also provide points of comparison. Unlike sleek, glossy futuristic films such as Minority Report or Blade Runner, Idiocracy intentionally uses chaotic, cluttered, and oversaturated set design and costumes to convey societal dysfunction. Bright colors, exaggerated branding, and poorly maintained infrastructure create a sense of sensory overload, which contrasts with the polished aesthetics of other science fiction films. This approach reinforces the narrative and comedic intent, making the visual environment a direct reflection of societal decline. In terms of storytelling, Idiocracy relies on both absurdity and narrative simplicity. The plot progresses through recognizable story beats: protagonist displacement, recognition of societal dysfunction, attempt to resolve a crisis, and ultimate restoration. But the exaggeration of societal traits elevates the satire. Compared to films that employ complex narrative structures, Idiocracy emphasizes accessibility and humor, allowing the audience to focus on thematic contrasts rather than intricate plot mechanics. This simplicity is a strength, as it keeps the satire clear and immediate. Another comparative point involves the treatment of media and advertising. While many films explore dystopian futures with oppressive technology or strict governance, Idiocracy uniquely emphasizes the omnipresence of marketing and entertainment. Advertisements dominate dialogue, clothing, and environmental design, creating a society shaped more by commercial influence than by political or technological control. This focus sets Idiocracy apart from other speculative films, making its social commentary specific, memorable, and directly relevant to contemporary concerns about media influence and consumer culture. The performances also distinguish Idiocracy in comparison to similar films. Terry Crews' portrayal of President Camacho combines physical comedy, exaggerated speech, and performative energy in a way that contrasts with more serious or restrained portrayals of authority figures in dystopian cinema. Luke Wilson's understated performance as Joe Bowers provides an anchor for audiences amidst chaos, a dynamic similar to but distinct from other fish-out-of-water protagonists in speculative comedies. The balance between exaggerated and grounded performances enhances both humor and relatability, reinforcing the film's unique tonal blend. Finally, Idiocracy's cultural commentary and audience reception separate from films that may share genre similarities. While other comedies or science fiction satires are primarily consumed for humor or spectacle, Idiocracy has inspired ongoing discussion about cultural trends, intellectual decline, and the consequences of over-reliance on media and consumerism. This dual function as both entertainment and social commentary gives the film lasting relevance, distinguishing it from comparable works that do not provoke similar reflection.